Garrett Langley started Flock Safety in 2017 after a crime in his neighbourhood went unsolved. Flock is now one of the most successful companies selling to law enforcement, known for their camera network across the roads and even drones to support police officers. Cheers.
Yeah,
good to see
cheers.
you.
Likewise, thanks for having me.
Okay, so maybe start by describing how does the Flock product work?
Yeah. Maybe we rewind like all the way back because it's evolved. So 8 years ago, living in Atlanta, and there's a fun fact is if you're in a place like Atlanta or Memphis or pick a town in the Southeast, if you would just pull 10 F-150 door handles, some, let's call it 3 out of 10 will be unlocked. And like 1 out of 10 will have a firearm in the glove box, which is like, regardless of the firearm, your point of view on it, it's like, you should keep a firearm in a safe. And you should like keep it in a safe, not in a glove box. Like that's just like really bad, but that's what people do. And so if you're, a gang member and you're trying to obtain a firearm, like the easiest way is just to like drive into a neighborhood, 6 kids, because they're kids, like jump out, you start pulling door handles. You don't have anything breaking into the car, you're just pulling door handles. So this happened in my neighborhood. Someone got a gun. Someone posts on Nextdoor like, oh my gosh, I forgot my gun in my car and it's now gone. And so the Atlanta Police Department comes and the major was like fairly apathetic. Like, hey, sorry, good luck. Like we're not gonna, to your Bosch thing, they're not gonna fingerprint the vehicle. Like no one's been hurt. And for most major cities,
there's no stakeout happening for this.
There's no stakeout. There's no like, oh, we're gonna go do all this resources. So for most major cities, if a human is not physically hurt, the crime goes just to the bottom of the list. And I found that really frustrating. Because like this should be like really easy. Like these people drove into our neighborhood, they stole a firearm. Like we should go after these people. And he was like, well, we don't have any information. Like, okay, well, what do you need? He's like, we need a license plate. Okay, great. So I was an electrical engineer. So I called a buddy of mine who studied computer science with me at Georgia Tech. And I was like, look, we're gonna go build this camera. It's gonna just like track license plates, that's it. That's what the Atlanta Police Department said. So, okay, great. So we built this thing. And if you ever come to the Atlanta office, we still have the original camera like on, pedestal that looks like garbage. I'm not a mechanical engineer. We put it up and all it did was track every car that came into our neighborhood. But as you can imagine, like after 30 days, you start to be able to know like that person clearly lives here. They're in the neighborhood twice a day, 4 times a day. And so about 2 months later, another car gets broken into, another firearm stolen. The same major comes back. And I was like, oh, by the way, here's the only car that doesn't live in our neighborhood that was here last night. That car gets put on what we call like a bolo, like be on the lookout for. A couple hours later, they find that vehicle. The gun's in the car. Person goes to jail. And what was really interesting is like we were like very proud of ourselves. This was not a business at the time, it's a project. And so the 5 o'clock news wanted to like do the story. So I'm on the 5 o'clock news, and the next morning, like I had 5 emails from neighborhoods. And I think we might be the only company that for the first, let's call it 20 or 30, 40 million of ARR, strictly driven off of 5 o'clock news. That was our only groth channel.
Yeah. That actual media appearance did drive.
And every time we solved a crime, we'd be like, hey, do you want to cover the story at 5 o'clock? And they'd be like, would love to. We love talking about crime.
Yeah, because this is local news. I mean,
it's local news.
It's
not, we're not going to go to the New York Times. No one cares about like a stolen sofa. Or like a stolen dog.
Okay,
but
like, that's
that
interesting. Did you start with, because I associate Flock today with being plugged into the stolen car databases.
Yeah.
But you started without that, just looking up suspicious stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you think about it, in the classic, I don't know who gets credit for it, there's 400,000 neighborhoods in America, and there's no consolidation of providing safety for those communities. And when I say neighborhood, that is a legally binding organization that can sign a contract.
Yes.
Not like you and me just put $20 together and say, let's buy this thing on the street. So that felt really interesting. And then the other kind of interesting insight that we developed, which took time, is I imagine at your house, you have a security system, you might have a gate to your house, you probably have a dog, you have all these things, right? They do 2 things that actually are not helpful. They tell you a crime has happened, they don't actually help you solve it. And then what about your neighbor? And so what we'd realize is that every single security system was focused on the individual.
Yes.
But like I think about my life in Atlanta, there was this like crazy random act of violence a couple years ago. And like my wife wouldn't run outside for a year. And like it had nothing to do with us. It was like a mile away. And so the whole
You
kind
live
of
in a
like
community.
premise became that you had to build a safety system for a community.
Yes.
Because that's actually what you feel. I mean, you live in San Francisco, you get it. Like even if you've never been the victim, if crime is up, it's really bad. So it was all neighborhoods for the first 3 or 4 years of the business.
So give me the stats on Flock today. Just how many cameras out there, crime stopped, or whatever. Because again, and maybe just describe the product as it exists
As it is
today.
now. So now it's a much more sophisticated product in that sense. So last year we helped clear just north of 1 million crimes in America.
What does help clear mean?
So I mean, we want to be clear that similar to probably how you feel in that like you help businesses grow, but like you didn't do the hard stuff. Like
you
made it easier.
them.
You made it really easy for me to grow Flock by making payments simple. I don't actually have to do any of the hard work of like chasing bad people, putting my life at risk. Like we write code and design circuits. Like it's not hard work. So we like to be very careful of like not overstating our value. So we were involved in the arrest, in clearance or successful arrest of over 1 million crimes.
Wow.
And in a lot of those cases, we are the end, the beginning, and everything. Outside of the human putting handcuffs on. And in some cases, we might be the tip of the spear. And so like for more sophisticated investigations, like the Brown shooter and the MIT shooter, there was a tip on Reddit, but then Flock was the way they found them. But like we weren't the tips. Like we can't take full credit. So maybe I'll walk you through like a recent example. And I won't name the city because it's the case is still going through prosecution. But so there was a 911 call. This is a major city in America. Our system hears 911 calls. We can tap into 911 call. This is kind of wild if you think about 911. Today, when you call 911 in San Francisco, let's say you get about 3 million 911 calls a year. A human picks up every single time. A human manually listens, manually types in information. Imagine if you were running Stripe and every single lead you received was human routed. You'd say, this is crazy. Well, that's how we work in cities today. So we hear the 911 call in real time. What that allows us to do is then figure out, what are they talking about? Is there any interesting information in the system that could find beneficial? So in this case, we had heard that it was an attempted homicide. Someone was like bleeding on the street. And all they could remember was that the suspect was wearing white Converse sneakers. Now, we have a product called Flock OS that allows us to integrate all the cameras in a city, whether they're Flock developed or not. And so that 911 call pops up. The kind of an operator is like, oh my gosh, there's a 911 call right there. They can listen to the call. They're like, this is a really violent situation. There's a privately owned camera I can tap in at. Double click that camera. They can use one of our products called Freeform. They can say, I'm looking for any individuals in the last 30 minutes that are wearing white Converse sneakers. They then find the individual. They can then push that video to the nearest officer. So we run on the dash of the police vehicles. And then that person gets arrested. And so if you think about the way it used to work, that case never would have been solved. Like it'd have been weeks, maybe months, and you could have gone a cold case. And in this case, this person was from a 911 call to an arrest in about 17 minutes. So we can do that on people. We do that on vehicles. So in that same version of the story, I'll give you one other story and then I'll give you a sense of it. So in a town in Colorado, there was an armed robbery of a Levi's outlet. Got to get your jeans one way or another. This is a funny one, actually. So they call 911. So we're plugged into 911, right? The real-time crime center operator hears it's an armed robbery. They also hear two things. The person has already fled the store, and they drove away in a white van that looks like a black and blue cow. It's like mistake number one is criminal. Like don't drive a weird car. Now this police department also has our drone that we build here in America. So they immediately click a button. The drone automatically flies at 400 feet to the Levi's outlet. That drone knows what to look for. It has the visual kind of nomenclature of a white van with black and blue spray paint. That using that same freeform, we can start to look for it. We get another 911 call of another outlet that's having the same time. So the drone is already in the air, zooms over. Drone has eyes on it. That video feed can now be sent straight to the nearest officer. And so in a traditional response, you're gonna come in hot, blue lights flashing, someone's gonna get hurt. This case, the drone's 400 feet up in the air. You have no idea. The drone's there. The guy drives home. As soon as he pulls in his driveway, 2 cops pin him in. Safe, tactical apprehension. So it's drones, it's some computer vision, it's cameras that track cars. It's quite a robust portfolio.
And what is Flock by the numbers today? So how many cameras, how many drones, how many law enforcement agencies,
Yeah.
how many individual entities?
Yeah, so it's just over 6,000 cities. So it's like well north of 50% of America that's covered by Flock.
By population.
Yeah, by population.
Yep.
So there's about 17,000 cities in the U.S., and we have all the big ones outside of Manhattan at this point. That's like the last one to go get.
Yes.
I'm not sure if that's going to happen anytime soon, the current situation there. But yes, it's pretty well deployed. And then, the business has gone from zero to, about 500 million in ARR in the last 7 years, building cameras, drones, and selling them to the government, which is like 3 strikes you're out.
That's incredible. And I feel like something non-American listeners mightn't realize is, so I grew up in Ireland, country of 5 million people, and there is just a police force, the Gardaí Síochána, the national,
the whole country.
Exactly, police force for the whole country. And that is a relatively common model in lots of places. In the United States,
it's the opposite.
It's very localized, and just maybe you want to talk about the average size of it. And I feel like what you're providing is, in some ways, scale economies and helping police forces coordinate with other agencies.
It's interesting. There's a dynamic that people don't understand, which you're right. So Ireland, most of the EU, Australia has 6 police departments. So let's call it effectively the same. It's a really big country. It's a lot of land. Most of South America, like America is really the only country that operates under a model where local municipalities provide a law enforcement service. It's very rare.
Yeah.
And the benefit, the pro is very straightforward, which is like you actually have a good chance of knowing the police officer that has your territory and has your patch of dirt. The downside is criminals don't really care where cities start and stop. They don't care where states start and stop. Yet historically, law enforcement agencies were incapable of sharing information. To give you a sense of timeline, the cloud was only recently made legal in Florida as recently as 2022. So if you were a law enforcement agency, you could not host your data in the cloud until 2022. Maryland was 2023. So
any coordination between agencies was very manual.
All phone calls.
Yep.
Faxing files. And so one of the big kind of unlocks of Flock was this realization that you could drive better collaboration because like if your kind of low-level criminal isn't maybe changing cities, but you look at some of the most like successful cases we've helped work, it's like multiple states, right? Like we did a huge human trafficking bust. It was 76 people arrested across 4 states, like all organized on Flock. And like,
and it's really hard for one agency to wrap their hands around that whole thing.
No, at that point you've got like 6 different local cities, 3 different state agencies, and the U.S. Marshals, all collaborating inside of Flock.
Yeah.
And like that's how it should work.
Yes.
Because in Ireland, that is actually the only option because you're the same police department. It's a very unique problem that America has created.
Law enforcement coordination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it shouldn't be controversial.
Yes.
But it's actually a very controversial topic.
What's controversial about it? I'm not aware of this controversy.
There's this interesting question of like your trust in government probably follows some type of, logarithmic expectation or linear expectation of like the farther you're removed from those people, the least trust you have. And so most people's trust of the federal government is very low. State, a little bit lower, local, full trust.
Yeah.
And so there's this interesting dynamic where, let's talk about like a most recent case. My guess is that most people don't have a lot of trust for certain federal agencies. But when stuff goes really bad, like the Guthrie kidnapping, it's the federal government that runs the investigation. Like they are the only ones with the actual resources to work these cases. It's the FBI that's running that investigation. The Brown shooter, the FBI. The Mar-a-Lago assassination attempt, the Secret Service. Like it goes down, but people have this big distrust. And so we actually see it in places like California. There is state legislation that law enforcement is not allowed to collaborate with the federal authorities.
Because of all the
certain topics, because of all of it's just different politics. And so we kind of have to sit in the middle.
Yes.
And when it's clearly legislated, like in California, it's actually, it's fine. That's the law. That's actually very simple.
Yeah.
It's in other states where it's opinion.
Yes.
And that's like, oh, that's really messy because we should just write laws. We should, you operate in a regulated space. Regulation, when done properly, just defines the rules of engagement. And sometimes it's better or worse, but like at least everyone knows these are the rules.
Yes. As I think about where Flock grew up and the helping with flagging stolen vehicles and kind of a very vehicle-oriented product, how does that work at a technical level? Like you guys, there was a stolen database, there was a database for stolen cars already, but that's an example of prior cross-law info. Like who maintains that database? How does it work?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So you think about, there's a couple of fun engineering problems that Flock had to solve. The first is, how do you do what we just described? Read a license plate, track a car on solar power with a 5G backhaul. And
which is the camera that you have installed in like a traffic light.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But you very rarely have fiber or power where you want to put a camera.
Yeah. So you want a self-sufficient box that you can
totally
throw
infrastructure
up
free
at an intersection.
Yeah. And be able to track a car going 100 miles an hour and do some level of computer vision on top of it.
Yes.
And that was a pretty fun problem because if you put, let's say you wanted to put a GPU in it, you can't run on solar power then. Yep. And so then it's like, all right, well then what do you do on the edge? What do you do on the compute?
And you can't buy any GPUs these days.
You can't, that would have been a huge disaster for us. But so the FBI maintains a list called the NCIC, which is about 250,000 to 500,000 known in vehicles with either warrants, could be the Amber Alert system, the Silver Alert system. Like we saw, sadly, like a ton of Silver Alerts too. I think we did just over 1,000 Amber and Silver Alerts last year that we helped clear. It's like missing adults, missing seniors, and missing kids, which is pretty sad stuff. And so we have a direct integration with the FBI for that. And then at a local level, let's say like the Bay Area, there is a Bay Area hot list that we maintain with those agencies.
Oh wait, so I assumed that there was a single integrated, when a car is called in as stolen, I assumed that went somewhere integrated.
So this is kind of scary. So let's say your car is stolen and you're in South San Francisco. They will immediately put it in the Bay Area Flock hot list immediately. It will take 24 hours to make it to the FBI hot list. And that's a CSV file that gets sent around on FTP servers across the U.S.
As much the economy runs. We're
You
very used to that
should be used to that at Start.
Yeah, exactly.
But so the real time happens on Flock, and then there's about a day lag to make it nationwide.
Okay, so local entities have some kind of local lists, and those propagate to a national database, which is an FBI database. And what you guys are doing is making that real time, which obviously, if a crime is unfolding in real time, is a big deal.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's interesting.
It's not good to wait a day.
Yes.
You can drive really far in 24 hours.
It turns out, yes.
Yeah.
And then you had some great stat before about just the fraction of, like, stolen cars are bad news, like the fraction of crimes that involve stolen cars.
There's an interesting phenomena where no one really steals a car for fun. Like, there's not much you can actually do. Like,
is that true, like all the sideshows and stuff? Like, isn't there a little bit of stealing cars for fun?
Well, the sideshows are definitely... they look fun. Never participated in it.
Neither have I, but just want to make clear here.
Yeah,
it's my official statement on the
dirt
matter.
Bikes, haven't ridden a dirt bike in a sideshow, but have watched plenty of videos online. That's fun. You're typically not stealing a car. You're typically driving your own car in those. You typically, while there are some people, I guess, who would steal a car and just drive it for fun.
Yeah.
The main use case is like when my car was stolen. And then they used it to go rob 3 CVS's.
Yeah.
Did a bunch of drugs in the car and then ditched it. And that's like a normal, you steal a car to go do something really bad. Yeah, or like you steal a car to go shoot someone, because you don't want to shoot someone in your own car. If you're thinking ahead, you want to do it in a stolen car. And
we've all watched Pulp Fiction. It's like,
this is like how you do this, right? And so we do a bunch of other interesting things. Like we have this feature called cold plating, where if we detect that the vehicle, from an AI perspective, the make and model doesn't match the DMV record, that clearly the person's driving with a stolen license plate. That's another thing you can do. It's easier than stealing a car. You steal someone's tag. So then you got to go down to we got to steal the same license plate from the same type of car. But then if we detect an anomaly that the same car is in 2 places at once, we'll flag that.
Yes.
It's like, that's kind of weird. That's like a glitch in the matrix. It's like we have all these, and we would call them more like anomaly detections, where it's like, this isn't illegal yet, but it sure is kind of weird.
Yes. And it's it provides enough reason to pull someone over.
Yes, and depending on the size of the city, it's enough to dispatch an officer. I think if you're a major city like San Francisco, you have enough going on.
Yes.
But if you're a foster city, you're a smaller town where thankfully you don't have violent criminals running around every day.
Yes.
You're like, ooh, that's weird. We have 2 cars with the same license plate in different parts of the city. We should go
Yes.
see what's going on.
Yes. It strikes me that what a way you can think about what Flock is doing is not changing any of the norms around privacy, but really expanding law enforcement's bandwidth to go deal with stuff. And so I don't think anyone really has an expectation of, a right to privacy of the car they are driving just being observed from a distance or their license plate being readable when out on a public road.
Yeah.
But if a car is called in as stolen, rather than officers manually, looking for that car and that license plate, instead you can just kind of much more quickly get it. And yet, this kind of stuff ends up super controversial from I don't want to say super controversial, but it ends up controversial from a privacy point of view. And so, I don't know, is that take too generous? Is there a Steelman of the other side? Why is it?
There is. I mean, I think you're right on the controversy. I would articulate it as like, if you're building a business that impacts millions of people's lives, it's going to be controversy of some degree. Like I'm sure there's someone who hates Stripe. I don't know why they would, but I'm sure that person exists. Just like there's someone who hates Walmart. It's like they're trying to sell cheap groceries. Why do you hate? It's like people hate every company. Maybe they hate us more. I don't know. I think there's a few things that make it for the Steelman argument. One is you can see it. All right, so I bet you if we pulled up your iPhone and we looked at the number of apps that you've given full-time local location services, it would shock both of us. And then if we looked at the number of data brokers who then leverage that data to sell you ads, we'd be really shocked. And I think if we rewinded 30 years ago and said, imagine these private companies tracked your location in real time and sold that to advertisers, we'd be like, that is unacceptable. But because we can't see it, we kind of let it go. We have this perception of anonymity, or being anonymous. Anonymity, thank you. Yet, like, you're an engineer. How many data points do you need to triangulate where someone is? How about where they sleep and where they work? And I know exactly who you are.
Yep.
And so, like, there is that one piece, which is because we operate in the physical world, we are held to a higher standard, which I think is a shame because, personal opinion, what I do online is way more interesting and telling about my personality and my life than what I do in the real world. Like I go from work to home and to like kids' birthday parties on the weekends. That's my life. So there's that piece. I think the second piece is like, there is a appropriate debate of what level of privacy erosion are we willing to take for an increase in safety? Now, you and I both choose to live in cities that have governments, so we've already chosen to remove some of our privacy. We drive on public roads where constitutionally we have no expectation of privacy because we're using the government's roads with the government's license plate. Like we have a driver's license in our pocket. Driver's licenses are a modern thing. That hasn't been around for 200 years. It's a newer concept to have a driver's license. So we've accepted all of those. The articulation that I would have is like, I want my kids to be safe. And like, as long as there's accountability of like how the information is used, which we do, every single action in our system, the audit is stored in perpetuity and it's publicly available. And there, for us, like we really believe in this concept of a certain data retention, which kind of limits the level of abuse. It doesn't eliminate abuse. Like, there's still going to be abuse, but it limits that, hey, if it's 7 days, 14 days, 30 days of data, it's just not that interesting. Relative to what you see with data brokers online, where they have your entire internet history stored forever.
You're interested in fresh data. That's what's
but criminals. Like there's a really fast drop off of where have you been in the last couple of days, versus like where were you a year ago? It's very irrelevant in a criminal investigation.
Yes.
Or it's protected behind a warrant, which is fine.
Right. You talked about cell phone locations and your cell phone having your GPS location, and I'm reminded of the phenomenon where it feels like the balance of power and the offense-defense mix within crime fighting tends to change over the years as new technologies are invented. And, criminals get wise to fingerprinting exists and things like that. It feels like cell phone locations have had a huge impact on crime fighting. Not even GPS location, but just the coarse cell tower data. And in particular in murder cases, it's had a huge impact. I'm curious just what are the other major trends going on from a technology point of view in how crime gets fought?
That's CDRs would be the the nomenclature in the law enforcement.
What's CDR?
Cell phone data dump, or CDR, cell
phone data record.
Something like that, yeah. But it's your point, it's the broader, like you hit these 3 towers, therefore you're in this general vicinity. That is like one of the best kept secrets for law enforcement of like how to solve crime, which people dumbly commit crime with their cell phone in their pocket every time.
Yep.
It's very rare. I think I've heard of one case in the last 12 months where someone was smart enough to commit a homicide and left their cell phone at home by design. It was a very intentional. They were very organized in the Bay Area. A couple other ones.
How did they get caught?
It's actually Flock, obviously. So they were smart enough to leave their cell phone.
Yeah.
They were dumb enough. So they drove from LA up to San Francisco, general area. They hit a bunch of Flock cameras along the way. They didn't pick up their cell phone until they went back to LAX. And we have cameras all around LAX. And like they finally made that one mistake. It was a completely cold case until they got a hit on the car pulling into LAX, then got the cell phone, could do the whole thing. This is a good case.
And I guess the thing you can do is you can know that a cell phone's in a car because you can...
We don't touch that, but the law enforcement can.
Law enforcement can cross-reference cell phone location with Flock.
What were all this? So they knew that the vehicle was in a certain parking lot.
Yep.
They can then use, they have to have a warrant at this point.
Sure.
Get a warrant to pull what cell phones were in that area. And then start to build the case. But to your question, I'd say the current phenomena that is causing a ton of problem domestically is drones. And this is an example where it's asymmetric warfare that law enforcement is being put up against, where criminals have no
criminals
rules.
Using drones?
So here's a good example. In one of the counties we work with, it's an affluent-ish county in the Virginia area, South American cartels fly illegal drones through these neighborhoods. They'll flip on night vision, look through houses to see if anyone's home, then go break in. Like they don't want a confrontation. They just want to go steal a bunch of stuff.
People are using drones to case houses?
Scope out. Yep.
Wow.
And this is where the downside is. Law enforcement has just recently in the last year been allowed to fly beyond visual line of sight. These guys have been operating for years.
Sure.
They jerry-rig, an LTE modem to a cheap drone. They can fly it anywhere, however they want. And then legally, even to today, law enforcement is not allowed to engage that drone. They can't take it down. It's FAA airspace. It's not law enforcement airspace.
Sure, yeah.
And so they just sit there. And so that's a problem in neighborhoods. It's also a problem in prisons. It's probably the number one problem we have in our prison system today. Well, a lot of problems in prisons. But one of the leading problems for enforcement officers is you've got these pretty incredible, actually from an engineering perspective, drones that are carrying 10, 20, 30-pound payloads, flying them over the prison walls, and like they'll literally dangle it down to like the prison cell, and the person will reach out and grab it. Cell phones, drugs, guns.
Keller from Zipline here. It's Zipline for criminals.
And these guys have built a comparable product.
Yeah.
And I was with a sheriff that I know really well, and he was like, if I shoot that down with a shotgun, I am technically breaking the law. I'm breaking federal law if I shoot this down with a shotgun. Yeah. And so you're seeing states now pass. Like Louisiana has a state bill, Georgia's working on a state bill that says, sorry, FAA, we're going to do what we want. And that creates a problem because most law enforcement officers just want to follow the law.
Yeah, and presumably that won't stand up from a federal preemption point of view.
No, and the other challenge is I think you and I would say who's gonna enforce this? Yes. The FAA is not an enforcement body, but these people want to follow the law, and the law says clearly you can't shoot a drone down.
Yes.
You can detect it. You can't mitigate.
I have no idea.
It's a totally crazy law.
Yeah. What else has gotten worse from an offense perspective?
I mean, this is one that's like I don't know if I have strong feelings on this topic, but this concept that we appropriately hold local law enforcement to a very high standard of accountability and audibility, and I think that's very good.
Yes. The
downside is we don't with criminals. And so as a citizen, you might be the victim of a crime. You get really frustrated that they're not working hard enough. And it's very rarely that. It's that they don't have the tools, they don't have the data, or they're not legally allowed to get to the data. And the warrant system is a very, very good thing. It's a very effective tool. But there's a debate of should law enforcement have more ability to solve crime faster? And the example of the framework that we use is, I don't know how you land this, is that the severity of a crime should be commensurate with the sophistication of technology. And I'll give you an example. Facial recognition, hot topic. There are thousands of cities in America that have banned law enforcement from using facial recognition. John, facial recognition is not bad as a technology. It's not good either. It's just technology. I think a way more effective measure would be to say, hey, look, facial rec has its pros and cons. You can't use it for shoplifting, but for homicides, crimes against children, like go to your list of things that like we as a society care deeply about. Law enforcement should do everything in their power to solve those cases. And then, the like petty stuff, we should say, look, like we gotta make progress there, but you stole a pack of Skittles. Like we probably shouldn't deploy a drone to find you. But like, if you kill someone, I think we should work really, really hard as a society to hold you accountable.
Yeah.
But there's no nuance.
That nuance does not come through.
No, they're just like, facial rec is bad. And we don't do facial recognition for that reason, because it's too controversial, but it's counterintuitive to me when the technology gets better every day.
Yes. And obviously another interesting thing that's happening amongst these trends is the prevalence of body cams, which I think maybe was in some corners promoted by law enforcement skeptics, but I think now has...
It's backfired?
I wouldn't say backfired, but just like it's actually, in a lot of cases, been somewhat exonerative, right?
Yeah, no, I think in many cases, police were really hesitant to get body cameras. Just like, imagine if you wore a body camera all day at work, you'd be like, I'm not sure if I love that idea. Yeah. It's kind of a little bit invasive, but they did. And I would say in the majority of cases that I see where foul play is called, it is almost always the inverse, where law enforcement officer was just trying to do their job. And on the other side, there was either a mental health issue, there was something gone wrong, and it actually exonerates the officer, which is kind of interesting. And I think the same thing is true, what at least we're seeing on the camera side, on the streets is, historical policing, sadly, is quite prejudiced, right? We all have our biases, whether it's conscious or unconscious. And so you have bad data in, you get bad data out. And so the traditional way of policing is like you go to dangerous neighborhoods, look for suspicious people, and arrest them. So it's like you're perpetuating a trend against a certain community. And when you look at like Oakland as a good example, who's quite a big supporter of Flock, they're like, we need a more objective way to police. Let's just focus on stolen cars.
Yep.
We don't care who's inside. We will find out eventually that car was stolen.
Yep.
And then you don't wind up policing where crime has happened historically. You end up policing where crime is happening right now, in real time. And that is a fairly fundamental shift in how policing works. And it, for many cities we work with, changes the perception of the kind of community with law enforcement. Because they're no longer felt like they're being targeted. It feels like it's wherever crime happens, we're gonna go chase it. And if there's not been crime in the last couple of days, then we're good.
Yep. Is crime up or down in the US?
It is down. I think it'll continue to go down. COVID was like really bad.
So
bad
it
mentally.
surged during COVID?
Crazy surge.
Okay.
People lost their minds. I think we tested society of like what happens if you keep people inside for too long, and people got really violent.
Yeah, so do you have an explanation? Is it that like it was a mental health issue, or was it kind of a crime of opportunity that, things were less well guarded and, there's more opportunities for crime, but you think it was just people went a bit batty being locked up?
I think so.
And resorted to crime.
But I'm obviously not a, clinical psychologist by any means, but it's like, you look at the data and there's no other way to articulate why, homicides 3 to 4x'd and then plummeted back down to, let's call it somewhat reasonable levels. Like there's a very few number of cities that are left at COVID levels. Most cities had this massive spike.
Yes.
And like the way to, if you look at the people who were committing that violence, they tended to be 16 to 22, male, and very online. And
very online?
Yeah. And so like this is really sad.
I'm sorry, how do you measure very online?
Let me give you an example. I was in a town, a major city, not too long ago, and I was asking the chief to tell me kind of what's going on. This is a couple years ago, right? Like during COVID. And she was like, Garrett, these kids are just killing each other. I was like, what? She's like, yeah, they're literally getting in their car and just shooting each other. I'm like, why? I'm like, oh, because this guy posted a picture of him with that guy's girl on Instagram. And I think in a normal situation, you might have called that person and been like, hey, bro, that's my girl. And in other cases, they're getting in a car and shooting someone. And like, that's not normal. That's not normal behavior. And it wasn't normal before COVID. And it happened a lot during COVID. And then it's largely gone away. But it was a very specific social phenomena where the the race to violence was so dramatic. It was so scary. And I don't think society has necessarily gone fully back to normal, but like, if you look at the data, it's hard to articulate that's the most obvious explanation to me.
And I guess there are other empirical measures like air rage incidents, road rage incidents, like all of that kind of stuff went up during COVID.
Everything went up.
Yeah.
Like everything. People just literally lost their minds. I think we like need to be outside.
Yeah. But okay, so how are we doing now on crime? You say it's down. Is that across all categories? Because you read Twitter and it's like everything's locked up at CVS and San Francisco is full of, you're like there's all these memes. Which are maybe do some debunking and confirming of all the memes.
So every city is a little bit different. Major cities still have major crime problems. I would argue, I live in Atlanta. And the mayor, he's made it very clear, anything greater than 0 homicides is a tragedy, and therefore we're on the race to 0 still, like as an unacceptable level. And we're down historic lows over the last decade, but it's still pretty hard to wake up and go, only 52 people died in Atlanta last year. You can't pat yourself on the back for that. I think where we're focused on is more so clearance rates. And that's actually getting better, but only better in certain cities. Now, we track it across Flock, not to overly promote, like tends to be that if you have a Flock product, your city has a much higher clearance rate. You look at San Francisco as a great example. The new chief, the prior chief, Mayor Lurie, like they are making crime a focus. And the focus is on solving crime.
Yes.
And when they solve it, as I'm sure you follow on the news, they talk about it.
Yeah.
And they should, because like it's really cool. They're working very hard. And what you'll see is back to the online point I made, all these people are online. And so when San Francisco PD is dominating X,
it has a deterrent effect.
Oh gosh, yeah. You don't want to get caught.
Yeah.
And that's like the unintuitive or the counterintuitive point on crime is that most people would intuitively say, if the punishment's really, really bad, people will do less of it. But you were 16, 18 at one point. You operate on a Boolean mindset. I will get away with this, therefore I will do it. I'm gonna sneak out of my house because I'm not gonna get caught. You don't care if the punishment is being grounded for a week or a month, you're gonna get away with it.
You're 17. Just will I get caught or not, yeah.
Yeah, and so when you flip-
realize criminals are so online.
So if you flip that, it's a subculture, you gotta get there. Yeah. But I mean, you'll see-
Sorry, is this like Reddit, Twitter?
They're everywhere.
Pinterest?
Probably less Pinterest, but I mean, TikTok's really big.
Yeah.
Instagram's really big, Snapchat's really big. And like it's how they recruit though, right? Because like the whole recruitment effort is, I'm going to show a lifestyle online that seems dreamworthy to recruit these people, and then they're in, and they're going to perpetuate that. And the data actually shows it's actually not a very good job. You actually don't make very much money being a criminal. Yeah. It's like the medium income for your average criminal is like it's very, very low.
Yeah.
But they promote a lifestyle of wealth. So if you look at those cities, like so you take San Francisco, crime's coming down. Clearance rates are going up. And I would say like as soon as we can get somewhere like San Francisco to 100% clearance rate, which we have in other cities, crime goes down.
100% clearance rate is like 100% solved?
Yes. And it's doable. We have it in major cities. And like Cobb County would be one, which is like the second largest county.
Cobb County has 100%?
Yep. If you commit violence in Cobb County, you will get arrested.
And that's across what sample size?
That's the second largest county in Georgia, so let's call it, a couple million people, almost 1 million people.
So a decent number of violent crimes.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And but it's going down every year.
Sure.
So look at places like that.
Because you will get caught.
Yeah, and so we have this new concept that we've developed called Safe City, and we'll go into a town and say, look, this is the platform you need to solve all the crime in your city. It's your choice. It tends to be like about $20 a citizen a year.
Yeah.
It's like it's your choice. And what's fun to watch is we find these mayors with really strong backbones. And they're like, I want to be a safe city. There's just like this awesome town, Greenville, Mississippi. You've probably never heard of it. 26,000 people. They have our drones, they have our cameras, they have our AI, they have everything we do. And they are lighting it up. And kudos to the mayor and chief, every crime they solve, they're on the 5 o'clock news.
So these are highly effective cities. What effect does it... What happens to the criminals? Does it shift it to other localities? And you need to, it's like, disease eradication, you ultimately need to do kind of enough to blanket it, to snuff it out. Because if just kind of one municipality does it, it'll shift to a local municipality. Does it actually, within that municipality, people just go to something non-criminal. I'm curious, what are the effects of
there's like
one municipality getting really good?
There's two phases. The first phase, you're spot on. Like people, they just change cities. It's like when San Francisco started adopting Flock, Oakland crime went up. So then Oakland needed to adopt Flock.
Yes.
And now like a couple of false starts, now that that's fully going, like they will have the same. But like first is the shift.
Yes.
And then you're right. Like people don't, the majority of criminals, let's call it 99% of criminals, are not evil people. They're not. Like evil is a random act of violence, and that is exceptionally rare.
It's mostly
very
just
rare.
opportunism.
It's all opportunism. And like you and I were fortunate enough to be born in a family, in a social construct that we could go build great companies, but not everyone had that chance. And some people get pushed in the wrong direction, and that's what we have to stop. It's like as a business, while we're proud of the impact, making 1 million arrests, it's actually like quite disheartening because that means like 1 million people will now have to go through the criminal justice system, which doesn't work that well. When there's 1 million victims, like it's bad in every single way. It's also crazy expensive as a society to jail that many people. It's a double negative bottom line where it's costly and prohibitive that they'll probably never re-enter society. So we're much more focused on the preventative mechanisms of like, how do you convince someone this is not a good lifestyle? This is not a long-term plan. And eventually what you will see is like, they will go get jobs. Like these are functional members of society. They can be functional members. We should push them in that direction.
What kind of crime is on the increase?
So I'll tell you one that's like pretty fascinating. So if you look in the enterprise community, organized resale crime in stores was really hot during COVID and right after COVID. That's why you saw CVS lock their stuff up. You saw, places like In-N-Out leave Oakland. Like this was a huge problem. And it's still, for someone like Walmart, I think they reported just shy of $1 billion of theft last year. So it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
And like their peers aren't doing dramatically better. Now, Flock customers are doing really well.
Yeah, and Walmart aren't neophytes at this stuff. They have
but
a
they'll
loss
get there.
program.
We'll get there with Walmart. But like you look at some of our partners like a Lowe's, their shrink has gone down order of magnitude. It's not really a problem anymore.
Yeah.
But where the criminals have moved is to the distribution facilities. It's safer and bigger loads. And so probably the most sophisticated one that I've heard of is it's an Eastern European group. They went and bought a legal, like well-running freight broker. They now own this asset, and they low bid on all these projects, show up with real paperwork, fill up a 20-foot with product, drive away, dissolve the company. $7 million in a single day. Like that's pretty good business.
Yeah. That's
very sophisticated though. Yeah. That's harder to solve. That's much harder to solve.
Because every car, phone, like everything will be disposable used in that.
Everything's going to leave the country as fast as possible and just show up on a street somewhere. Yeah. And then the other interesting challenge is you have to unpack, this is like a little bit complicated, who's liable. So as soon as the product goes into a store, that retailer is liable for the theft. Like it hits their bottom line. For a lot of these companies, they negotiate it such that, there is insurance coverage from a different broker that owns that asset until final delivery. And so it's not super clear like who actually cares. And it's going to take—
the insurer cares.
Insurer cares eventually.
Yeah.
But when you talk about the scale of, let's call it, tens of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars of product being moved, you're like, oh, we lost a couple $100 million.
I see. Yeah.
We'll be fine. We have insurance.
Yeah.
It will catch up eventually, but that's probably the most interesting type of crime we're tracking is the tacking on the distribution. So we have a lot of partners on the distribution side where we're now deploying our product to try to prevent this becoming an epidemic.
Yes.
But it's much harder to solve. Like it's a real company.
Yes.
Like
I want to ask you more about this, but I'm going to get another goodness. This is a good segue into your corporate business because, again, people associate you with selling to municipalities, but obviously you sell a lot to corporates as well.
Yeah, it's a big part of our business.
Can you say how big?
North of 100 million of ARR.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
so like it's real.
Yeah.
Told me to go all in.
Oh, sorry. Well, you had some drags left. I'll get them off.
That's my fault.
Yeah.
Here, take a real one.
You want to just go full up end,
Okay.
You'll get more of a head that way. And it's the correct.
Oh, it is?
You can trust it, yeah. Okay, so the corporate business.
So, corporate business, north of 100 million of ARR, probably fastest growing segment. There's some wild stories. So, we help businesses solve two problems. How do you keep your employees safe, and how do you keep your assets or your stuff safe?
Yep.
So it's like kind of funny because we have a Fortune 5 company that's a customer.
And you probably don't want to talk about specifics, but we should just imagine big box stores, the kind of
Well,
Home
this is
Depot,
the
Walmart,
thing is like we have this like Fortune 5 company that's a customer, and they spend like $100,000 a year because they have like 3 locations in the country. That's it. They have like 3 really big campuses.
Yeah.
So they're actually like we don't proxy towards necessarily like market cap or revenue. We proxy to physical locations. Like how many locations? So someone like a Dollar General is a way better prospect for us because Dollar General has 7,000 stores.
You want Subway.
Yeah, you want Subway is a good example. So we tend to focus on retail, healthcare, and logistics.
Yep.
They tend to have big physical footprints, a lot of employees, and a lot of challenges.
And is their main challenge theft? Like that's what they're worried about, that they want to prevent stolen cars coming to steal stuff?
I'd say employees is, I'd say 3 years ago when we started the business unit, it was assets. It was like, oh my gosh, coming out of COVID, everyone's stealing everything.
Yep.
It is much more shifted now to keeping employees safe. So you think about some of these businesses, they might terminate 500,000 people a year, 250,000 people a year. It takes one angry employee to come back. And so in our system, you can have it automated, with your HRS that like, when an employee is terminated, they're added to a localized hot list. If that employee ever comes back on campus, it's not illegal, but notify security is why people have security teams. Like, don't let them in the building. So it's about kind of moving that layer of safety farther out.
Yes.
The other example is like we do quite a bit of work like in executive protection. So I'll give you like a good example. If you think like a Fortune 2000 CEO, our stuff's deployed at her house. We also deploy at corporate. It's not illegal, but it's quite weird if the same vehicle on the same day goes to both locations. And so for like
that is not that person.
It's not that person or their EP team. And so like I think keeping people safe is the number one thing. And then the assets is like, it's good, but worst case, you just raise prices, which is not good. But like we had this crazy case with one of our healthcare partners where this group, pretty smart actually, would show up to the hospital dressed in like a certain company's uniform and be like, oh, the robotic surgical arm it needs to be repaired. Can you help me grab it? And some clinical surgeon's like, oh yeah, let me show you where it is. No worries, John. Walk in there. This is a multi-million-dollar piece of equipment, and they literally walk out with it. This happened
like
in
some Thomas Crown affair kind of stuff.
But it's like, I mean, you're a physician. You're not thinking like, oh, is John actually working at this company? Is the product, I think I used it yesterday. You're like, oh yeah, that sounds right. It's super expensive product. So this is an example to your conversation of like where the business gets interesting is we then connected that healthcare provider with federal authorities. Because this is not this isn't going to be a local authority to solve this kind of crime. It's a federal crime at this point. Where they were taking the product, exporting it, and selling it in a different country for kind of clinical work. So we think that one is pretty interesting. There's like, and that's an asset one where actually the healthcare system is like, this is like $20-something million of product stolen. Like, that's a problem.
Is your business going international? Which countries is this best suited to? Like, is this a universally applicable product? Do those differences in law enforcement agency structure make it? I'm just curious.
I mean, we're dabbling, but I think payments is probably like a very global, like everyone wants to process payments, I think.
Yes, but there's a lot of local nuance.
Yeah. I think for us, maybe our ambitions aren't big enough, but when I look at the domestic opportunity, we should be able to get to 5, 10, 15 billion of revenue in America. And like, we're not there.
Yes.
And so it's the difference of, to your point on the nuance in payments, it's probably comparable to the nuance of working with local government, but then you overlay hardware and that just gets maybe 2 steps too difficult for my stomach today.
Got it.
Today.
Yeah.
But we get an inbound, I saw an email this morning from an Australian police department. It's like, we'd love to do a demo. And it's like,
why not just I agree there's a lot of nuance. Is there some aspect of your tech, like you've put a lot of work into the cameras, vehicle recognition, stuff like that. I know again, from painful experience, that localization is never easy and never as easy as you think.
Here's.
But maybe it's easy.
Yeah. Well, so here's the argument. So we pursued one really big deal last year in Mexico. And we had support from one of our investors, like, we should go after Cigar. Great. And they had connections to the Mexican government. And so we got all the way to the finish line. And it was us versus Hikvision. Hikvision is a Chinese camera manufacturer, arguably a subsidiary of the CCP. And we were almost 10 times the price. And it came down to like, well, is the Department of Homeland Security going to subsidize for this for the Mexican government? Because this, we know their list price is way more than this.
Yes.
It's very clear this is being subsidized for the Mexican government to make this purchase decision, of which case they will most likely be giving away real-time feeds to another government. And like, we didn't win that deal. And like, I think that if you look at, there's a great book on this topic. If you look at what China was able to do in Africa with their infrastructure deployments on connectivity,
Stuff, yeah.
They own those countries.
What's the book, out of curiosity?
I'll find it for you.
Okay, well, we'll pop it in.
I'll find the book. But the book pretty much shows that like one of the maybe smartest moves that China did was going to these developing countries and saying, we will give you 5G. Really low cost. We'll bond it for like 100 years. So we're not giving away for free, but guess what now? Chinese government has access to your pipes. And maybe that's not scary for some countries. For me, I'd be a little afraid. And that was our pitch to the Mexican government, is like, you don't look at just cost, look at the sovereignty of the data and who has access, and look, we'll domicile this data in your country. We won't domicile it in America. And they were like, sorry, it's too expensive. And we've seen that. We've done a couple other projects like that, not just picking on Mexico, but other countries where we're not competitive with China, not because our products aren't better, I think they're much better, but we're not being subsidized by the federal government.
But presumably NATO countries, Australia...
Should be better, but I mean, no. I mean, we should go walk around, a strip mall, and I could probably point out 80% of the cameras are Chinese manufactured. And your average would-be business owner is like, I got it for $15 on Amazon.
Yeah.
And like, I don't know if you know that story on kind of like the, was it the vacuum cleaners that someone hacked into? It's like
the robot vacuums.
You should care about where your data is stored and who's storing it, and that kind of stuff matters to me, but not everyone.
That makes sense. As we've learned from Flock Safety, fighting crime is most effective with network data on your side. The same is true for payment fraud. Most businesses only see their own transactions, which makes it very hard to spot patterns and prevent future attacks. But Stripe Radar tackles fraud using the power of the Stripe network. Our machine learning models train on hundreds of billions of data points across the $2 trillion of payments we see on the Stripe network each year. When new fraud patterns emerge, our models can quickly learn and start blocking similar attacks immediately. So if you want to fight fraud like Flock Safety fights crime, check out Stripe Radar. As I think about your competitive landscape in the US and companies that sell to law enforcement, I think about Axon, which people would associate with making the body cameras, but they make lots of it, and tasers, I think, but they make lots of other stuff. And then Motorola Solutions, which does kind of the radios and like the get up in the cars and things like that. Are you three the main three players? Are there others I should be thinking about? And how will it presumably you guys compete more over time?
Yeah. So I remember in 2020, trying to raise our Series B, and every investor came to the same conclusion. It's like 3 strikes, you're out. Like strike 1, you're based in Atlanta. Now like post-COVID, that's become like less of a problem, but strike 1, you're in Atlanta. Strike 2, you're doing hardware. Like that's really bad. Hardware is like really expensive. Now
it's the only business with terminal value.
I would argue that like AI is not gonna like replace cameras or dig holes. And it's like, I mean, a third of our employees dig holes for a living. Like that's just, AI is a long ways away from, I think, replacing that.
Sorry, what are they digging the holes for?
Because like most of the time you want a camera where you don't have any infrastructure.
I see, it's
we
like
actually
a
show up,
post or something.
We dig the hole, we trench it, we pour concrete, put our pole up. I mean, I might be
so it's on your own pole. I assume it was mounted on an existing pole.
I think I should pull this data. I would not be surprised if I'm the largest general contractor in America. We pulled 77 permits a day last year. And if you've ever built a house, you know how difficult it is to permit something. 77 permits a day. Like crazy scale.
Yes.
AI is not going to replace that. It's like a very safe asset. So when we were trying to raise that Series B, the second strike was hardware. Third strike was, and you're trying to sell to the government. The last company to go public was Axon. They went public in 2005, which would have been 15 years prior. And in the VC speak, it's like, well, if you can't get big enough to go public, you're not worth investing in. It's like, well, crap. So luckily, Gary Tan shared my beliefs of like safety should be a public right. It shouldn't be a privilege. It should be a right if you live in America. So he did our Series B, which is, I think, to say, only Series B he's ever done.
That's awesome.
And he was right, and I was right. So it's the three of us now. It's Motorola who's the biggest. They're about a $90 billion market cap, 120 years old, invented the radio, still are I think they have 80% of market share globally of landmass radio, just like crazy scale.
It's funny how durable some of these businesses, Garmin and other, like you just start doing GPS, you start doing radio, and you stay doing radio.
Own it. You just own it. And to like Motorola's credit, like they've driven a ton of innovation on the radio itself. Similar to Garmin, which like you'd thought Garmin would have been crushed, and it's like
they've been so creative in creating verticals, aviation,
and they built
marine, all this stuff.
Awesome products.
Sports.
And no one would debate whether Motorola's radios work really well. And when you need them, which would be like a natural disaster, they work especially well. And that's like pretty compelling when your job is to respond to natural disasters.
Totally,
So you have Motorola. Every single thing we do, we compete with Motorola in. So that's fun. They're big. Second one would be Axon. Like I said, public in 2005, about a $40 billion market cap.
Where'd they come out of? Like I understand where Motorola came out of.
Yeah, so Rick Smith's the founder, graduated Harvard. It's like a fun fact. He plays it off. He's like a very smart guy. Graduated Harvard, found this taser company. It wasn't called Taser at the time.
Okay, so they started with tasers.
Yeah, found those kind of the IP, the product, and then tried to commercialize it. And it's if you love a good founding story, it's a good one where almost went out of business. His like dad mortgaged the house. He mortgaged the house. Went public because they couldn't finance it. I think they went out at like a $50 million market cap. This is like when people went public, much earlier, and just has done a really good job of growing the business in the public markets.
And Taser is a brand. It's like Kleenex. They started as Taser.
They started Taser and rebranded to Axon in 2012 or 2015. And got into body cams via acquisition. So they bought a company that had just won the contract in the New York for the New York Police Department to do body cams. So bought that. They have a dash camera, and they'd recently launched a competitive product with me. So now we compete. Everything we do, we compete with Axon too. Which is fun.
So it's just a Mexican standoff,
ironically. Every single city. And then what's interesting, because your question was also in the future, there's this really interesting phenomenon happening now where, because Flock's been somewhat successful, VCs have like poured in. And when I used to call a police department 7 years ago,
now you have a bunch of competitors from
no
below
one
as well.
would know. Like you could literally just walk into the police department, come meet the chief. They're like, oh, that's great. Now chiefs are like, right, 17 different people calling me for the exact same. Now they don't compete with us, thankfully. But like you think about trying to deploy AI to monitor body cam footage. There's 7 different companies with VC backing doing that. It's not a big enough market. I think your annual report was great, by the way. Y'all are at what, 1% of GDP or something, probably? Okay, I'm in 60 to 70% of the cities that matter.
Yes.
There's just not enough space for 7 competitors. Like the market's not big enough, and we're not creating new cities. There's new businesses created every single day.
I think you tend to see structurally in these smaller, it's a large market in total, but kind of where there's a finite universe of buyers, the distributional advantages are very powerful. I think that's what you're saying.
I think so. And so I think what we'll see is, I see a new VC-backed company every day, and I'm like, there's just all these things are going out of business, so there's just going to be consolidation. And so you see, I think Motorola has done 40 acquisitions in the last 2 years. Axon did 5 last year. We did 1 last year. I just think you're going to see
everyone in the space
a ton of consolidation. Because once someone builds a good product, you go, great, I already have a sales force, I have the customer base.
Yes.
We'll just pick you up.
So I had no idea about the, you're talking about where the tech goes. I had no idea about 2 things actually I learned here. One is that you're doing real-time analysis of 911 calls. And so is that being fed to an LLM basically, or like a 911 call is now scored by an LLM?
So the way I think about it is, when we are trying to build an orchestration layer for a city's safety. The majority of police departments are understaffed. I think the worst I've heard recently, I was at a higher ed, so college campus, a large college campus, a football school. They're 40% of staffing. Could you imagine if like tomorrow you woke up and Stripe had
was 40% staffed?
40% staffed?
Yeah, it'd be tough.
You would like figure it out,
Yeah.
but a lot of things that you would deem core today would just stop.
Yes.
And so that's how most of our customers operate, which is not sustainable.
Yes.
And so we view our job as like being that force multiplier, or I like to think about this orchestration layer where every manual thing that's done by a human should be automated. Now, the difference in public safety versus maybe payments is like, I think you want humans at the start and finish still. Mm-hmm. It's like if I call 911, still kind of want a person to pick up.
And those dispatchers are incredibly well trained.
They're very well trained.
Yeah.
They're very calm. Now, where I think it gets valuable is like, but let's say there's a mass event. AI is way better because if you have a surge of demand and you go from only 1 call a minute to 10 calls a minute, AI is better than a busy tone.
Yep.
And that makes sense. And then I think about, for us, we call it amplified intelligence. When that 911 call comes in, LLM is able to pick up the call, is able to determine what are the characteristics. Can I go sort of build an investigation? Can I go pull this up so that if you're the detective, whereas historically you walk in, you're like, all right, I'm gonna go get the call transcript, I'm gonna go look up my record system, I'm gonna go do a bunch of analysis. It's the equivalent of having, whether you use something like a Glean or another product that's like, it's gonna do a lot of the hard work so that as a sales rep, you show up and you're like, got it.
Yeah. Yep.
And so we do that for investigators. So they show up to, they get delivered a case and a lot of the busy work has been done for them so they can use the human part of their job.
Aggregating all the data they need.
All the different data, like let's go do this. Like we solved one of the cooler cases we've solved was a armored, like armored trucks, they like Brinks, they move money around. Was one of the best, it's called like a jugging case. It's very popular in Texas where you follow these armored trucks and you typically have like a shooter on a nearby building. And when the person walks out, the shooter shoots him, the other guy runs in, grabs all the money and runs away. It's like it's obviously sad, but it's a very, very profitable thing. So we built an agent that tracks armored cars. And so at all times, it is literally saying, okay, here's an armored truck. If we ever see other vehicles tracking this car, flag them automatically. Now it's not illegal.
Yeah, sure.
Right? But it is enough that if you're a city like Houston who has a jugging problem, you want to get a subscription to you let me know whenever you see someone doing that because I want to know.
Yeah.
I want to get a step ahead.
Yes.
So there's all these types of crimes that you can start to say, okay, this is helping officers not do something new. It is just doing things that when you're at 50%, 40% staffing, if you're at 100%, you would have been doing this yourself. You'd be checking the cars, you'd be in flock, you'd be running searches, but you can't do that anymore.
Yeah, what you're describing is, again, having this data to be able to do anomaly detection just allows for a new kind of police work that otherwise just wouldn't have gotten done.
No, it's like people's lives, you know?
And then the other thing I hadn't realized you guys were doing is the drone assistance where, again, this sounds to me like, obviously already it's the case that, many police departments have a helicopter and then for very serious crimes, they will task it. But that's expensive, very limited resource. And so I think what you're doing is allowing for some manner of air support to just be much more cost effective and available to more officers.
That's right, yeah. I mean, I think it's another example where there's just a lot of tasks we ask law enforcement officers to conduct that a drone could do faster, more effectively, and cheaper.
Yes.
And so if it's, calling out a hit and run, great, send the drone. I was working with a town in Tennessee. It's a good city. Their average response time to a 911 call is 7.5 minutes. Their drone from us gets there in 68 seconds. It's just like a better quality of service. Yep. And the incremental cost is less than the cost of one single officer. Mm-hmm. It's really nice when you see technology deliver both like a 10x better product at a dramatically lower cost.
Yeah.
That's how it's supposed to work, and it's working for them.
What kind of task or intervention are the drones best suited for?
I mean, there's 3 primary use cases. The first would be vehicular pursuits. Mm-hmm. It's like one of the most dangerous things cities conduct is high-speed pursuits.
Sure.
Typically, it's not the suspect that dies, it's some random person.
Pedestrian or something, yeah.
So for most of our towns that have adopted our drone program, they end pursuits. They don't pursue anymore. Send the drone.
Oh, wow.
Just send the drone.
Yeah.
way better.
Yeah.
It's way safer. So that's a
So you
a
don't
big
have
one.
like a police car running at 80 miles an hour down a residential street.
No,
Yeah.
you just have a drone 400 feet up in the air,
Yeah.
quietly, safely, waiting for the car to pull into a gas station, pull into their home, pull in somewhere safe, get to a red light. And then meanwhile, that video feed's being broadcasted to the entire police department. It's like, great, John's over here,
Yeah.
block him in.
It's, every pursuit goes to GTA level 5 immediately.
Yes,
basically.
if you're smart.
Yeah.
So that's a big one. The second is 911 calls. So what's been interesting is that we'll send the drone first. It takes someone like Elk Grove up in Northern California. They've got a bunch of our drones flying the 911 calls.
So where's Elk Grove?
Elk Grove, it's a suburb of Sacramento.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But maybe 75,000 people. So I say suburb, it's like a pretty big town. But so like they'll dispatch for 911. Majority of the calls actually never need a human to show up. And the example I'd give you is like you see a fist fight, so you call 911, and then what happens is historically like 7 minutes later, someone shows up. Guess what?
Yeah.
They're no longer fighting. But now we've dispatched this officer. He's like, well, I'm in the area. Maybe I'll grab a Gatorade, walk around, check it out. 30 minutes later, like we've wasted a bunch of time.
Yeah.
You send the drone. In best case, you see the guys fighting, and you're like, great, I'm going to keep an eye on them and allow the officer to do his job. Or if there's not a fight anymore, you dismiss the call. And so you actually decrease the response time for situations you really do need to go to by removing the junk in the system. That's the second one. And the third one is search and rescues. Not every city has a helicopter. The cities that do, it's a very expensive proposition.
Sure.
And so sadly, like people go missing all the time. And you can, pop up the drone, throw on thermals, particularly it's at night, and you find the person.
Actually, I hadn't thought of that, but drone plus thermal camera is very transformative for SAR.
No, we had an interesting case in a cold state right now. Who's flying our drone? There was a lot of my cases involve homicides. I gotta find a better topic than homicides at some point.
I have a better topic for you in a second.
Okay, great. So there's this 911 car on the side of the street. Launch the drone, throw on thermals. Actually see where the person went. Like sensitive enough to see like the heat pattern. Like there's like there's in snow. Want to find the guy, want to find himself and everything. But it's just interesting. Like to your point, I think we're still very early on in the use case exploration. And I think it's just the type of technology that until it's fully proliferated, which give it 2 or 3 more years, I think we'll continue to find more like ways to augment how we respond. Because I guess the last example I'll give you is we typically launch the drone for all first responders. So it's not just law enforcement, it's fire, it's EMS, like the whole community gets advantage of it.
Okay, my fun example, because I agree, a lot of the crimes are quite heavy topics. So I feel like one of the most satisfying genres of YouTube video to watch is people who laser aircraft, but they are mistakenly lasering a police helicopter. So this is insane crime that happens.
Wait, why do they do that?
Okay, so there's this insane crime that happens.
Isn't that bad? It's like very dangerous.
It's very bad. It's very dangerous. Yeah. But like bored people, to your point of just maybe people going mad during COVID and being cooped up, people just for fun laser aircraft, it's very dangerous. Like it's dangerous for anyone's eyes shining a laser into them, but like a pilot who is flying a plane full of people at that moment, it's especially bad. But it's a real problem that happened. You listen to like ATC recordings all the time, like airliner going into LAX, getting lasered by someone on the ground. And so people buy these lasers on Amazon.
Yeah, they're like very powerful lasers.
Exactly, they're very powerful and they're just lasering the cockpits of aircraft. But occasionally what happens is they're lasering an aircraft, but it turns out that aircraft is the police helicopter.
And they're just like, gotcha.
And they got the thermal and they're just like, and so you get to watch the whole thing unfold. There's a bunch of these on YouTube with like, see the squad cars coming up and it's,
I'll have to check that out.
But it's such an odd crime and it's very satisfying to see them caught in real time.
Yes. That's a really weird, the other interesting too, because I know you like aviation stuff. Yeah, we're seeing more and more police helicopters have to turn off ADS-B as well. Because like criminals have the same data that you have.
Yeah, sure.
And so most of the police helicopters actually fly without ADS-B now, which is like a whole challenge.
Yep, sure. From a separation point of view.
Yeah.
Okay, I have so many more things to go into. We're kind of jumping around, but I like this. How's the business evolved? So you're now, you said around 500 million in ARR, selling to both law enforcement agencies and corporates. Just have there been interesting changes in how you monetize? Is it just a question of scaling up?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the biggest challenge is, 2-3 years ago, we were single product, single customer. Like we had our neighborhood business, it was growing 20-30% year over year, but it was kind of just operating.
Yep.
And law enforcement was going really, really fast. We had one product, and then maybe made a mistake. I know RJ from Rivian was here. And some story, like probably built too many products for too many customers really quickly. And in hardware, that's really expensive. Hardware tends to follow this J curve of like huge CapEx investment up front to get the thing going, and then you monetize and it actually winds up being...
And there's very significant scale economies at very high orders of magnitude.
Yes. Yeah. And so, we went from one camera that tracks cars to a camera that's focused for people, a drone, this trailer, multiple customer segments. And that's really hard.
Yeah. So looking back at it, you think you went too broad too quickly?
Yeah. I would have better...
So did you discontinue products and stuff?
We just
stuck with them
through it.
Yeah.
Just still muscling
When you slowed down the rate of adding products.
We were like, we cannot do any new hardware products this year. Like we need to take a year or two off of hardware products. We can debate software products because there's no incremental burn or cash outlay for it. But we know what the J curve looks like. Like we saw it in the core business, and like the core business now is profitable, which is great. Like we'll generate free cash flow, hundreds of millions of dollars of operating cash flow this year. But like those new businesses are effectively like Flock 5 years ago. And we know how painful that is, but we were just like, oh, it'll be great, it'll be fine. And so I think that's been challenging for us, is how do you balance from a product roadmap servicing two customers with just very different use cases. Like your average Amazon distribution facility is 30 acres, 50 acres. That's like a neighborhood block. And then you've got like a San Francisco that's got hundreds of square miles. So the problems are different. So that is probably like the hardest thing that we're still trying to muscle through that. And like, how do you organize your company to service these two different customers without having redundancies? Haven't figured that out.
What have you learned, other than don't make too many products? What have you learned by building hardware? Or what have you learned about building hardware?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things that I would jump to. The first would be, I don't know how you guys think about forecasting demand. It's a full-time profession at Flock.
Sure.
And it typically needs to be 12 to 18 months out. And if you look at the like hardware companies that don't make it, that's actually where they fail.
No, we ended up with, our hardware business is a very small part of our overall business, but we wildly overproduced at one point.
And you're just sitting in a warehouse, like there's all my money.
Exactly.
Sitting in a warehouse.
Just sitting around.
Now, luckily it's not, it's not going to go bad. It's not like bananas. It's like, oh gosh, we have like a week to move this product. But
it kind of goes bad.
But it does go bad at some point. And I think like, I remember during YC many years ago, talking to Eric at Pebble of how it's like the irony that in the best year ever of the company in terms of revenue is the year they went out of business. And I'm like, that's crazy. But they overproduced in Q4, even though it was still a record quarter. It just still wasn't enough. So I think like that has been amplified by also our distribution process, like which we're full first party. So we not only design the stuff, build the stuff, we install the stuff. And so I have to have forecasting.
Maintain it, presumably.
Maintain it as well. So I have to have forecasting not just at the product level, but at the geographic level by product, with some level of discrepancy. Like I don't need to know this city versus that city, but at least the general area. So like, I think forecasting, that's been pretty hard. And the second is, every decision you make in hardware is millions of dollars at a minimal and often tens of millions of dollars. And so when you grow up in this Silicon Valley mindset of like, everything's a two-way door. Bullshit. Hardware, everything's a one-way door. You want to pick that part?
Great.
One-way
door.
We're
going to live with it for the next 5-10 years.
And like, I don't know, you probably don't track this as much, but probably the dumbest financial mistake I've made in the last year is our supply chain team came to us like 6 months ago and they were like, solid state memory is getting really expensive. And like we had this one part that was in our cameras and the price had gone up 4x in near time, which indicates that typically one much, much larger company placed a massive order. And so we've seen this time and time again where an Apple or a Sony or some consumer, a Samsung, we'll pick a part for a new product that's coming out in 12 months, and the supply globally disappears.
Okay, so you're feeling the AI data center build out in your supply chain.
Yes, and so our supply chain leader was like, "This is getting crazy," and I was like, "Well, who do we use?" And I go, "Use SanDisk." And so I'm looking at their stock, and I'm like, "Oh, should we be buying like SanDisk?" I was talking to my CFO. I was like, "Should we be buying SanDisk stock?" I was like, "Their prices are going up 3x. It means that like a lot of people are buying a lot of products."
Yes.
Now, of course, the stock's up like 1,200%, and I feel like an idiot for not like following that conviction. But no, yeah, I mean, our BOM. Now, luckily, it's a small part of our BOM.
Yeah.
But like, we have a full team of people who all they do is mitigate global supply chain risk. Because parts just disappear.
Yeah. Okay, so just getting the products into the hands of customers as already spec'd is non-trivial.
So what we wind up doing, which I think a lot of companies do, I'm not sure if we're special, but it's just like you don't think about this, is, when we look at a BOM of a product, we'll risk purchase, not necessarily the whole thing, but the cheapest, highest risk things. So like we should have bought, and we bought a ton of memory so that we didn't run out because we can't.
But I would have thought, often these supply chain crunches come on the leading edge where, everyone's fighting over TSMC, 3 nanometer node production capability. But, the auto chips at, much larger gate sizes or larger nodes are not as contended. And I would have thought that you guys are not using tippity top end cameras and lenses and memories and things like that. So, but that's not a panacea.
It's like capacitors. And the point I give you is like, let's say we ship, 100,000 units. That's tiny. And so all it takes is, if we need this capacitor from Texas Instruments, all it takes is Apple saying, well, the iPhone 27 is going to have that capacitor. And Apple's like, cool, we'll buy everything for the next 3 years. And then we go, oh crap, we got to completely
But I'm just surprised you're competing with Apple for components. Like I would have thought their capacitors and your capacitors.
Everything, I mean, capacitor is a capacitor, but so to actually know the capacitor you want, you have to have a supply chain to buy it. You have to have enough inventory with enough lead time. Like it is not, and so what you wind up doing is like early on, your designs are very simple. You buy everything from, Adafruit or whatever. You buy everything like from easy places where you can buy 50 at a time. And when you move to like tens of thousands at a time, you start having to have designs that have 4 different derivatives for every part so that your supply chain team doesn't have to call engineering being like, this part's out. They know like these parts are all sub-ins.
You're describing the scale diseconomies of manufacturing where it's easier to buy 3 of something than it is to buy 30,000.
100%. And I never would have thought we would need like a team of people who all they do is spend money for a living. Just buy stuff.
What's hard about operating the hardware? Like how do you keep the lenses clean on the cameras and just how do you, I don't know what the other...
It's like on the one hand, we're some of the best weather forecasters. It's like we keep track of every major storm.
Yes.
It's like storm, like we need to be back up. And so we do, like we have a pretty cool, we call it our flight team. And there are technicians that only fly. It's like that big storm in New York and Boston, like they were flying in to the storm. Like we had surge demand to fix stuff.
To be on site when they get a call that something is down, go repair it.
Yeah, well, so everything, we have really good telemetry on the equipment. So like if a customer calls, something's gone, like we've really screwed up.
You know before the customer
We know
knows.
before the customer knows. And most of the maintenance at this point is fairly predictive. Like we know this mechanical part malfunctions after between 100 and 200,000 uses. So like if you're in the area, it's ironic that the largest cost structure in replacing equipment is the driving.
Sure.
It's driving. And so like if we think the part needs a replacement in 6 months and we're nearby, it's cheaper just to replace it, refurb it, and get it back in the field. So that part's been like we had to build a software company, a hardware company, and a field services business.
Do you have parts that wear out? I would have thought the whole thing is fairly solid state.
Most of it's, drones obviously fly.
Different kettle of fish.
But on the camera side, there's one part, which is the IR cut filter. So when we operate at night, we operate on infrared, and you need a different filter so that you don't have pink images during the day. So that literally changes twice a day.
Oh, like something mechanically...
Put a lens over it.
I see.
And after a couple 100,000 uses...
The one moving part.
It is the one, and it is the only part that breaks.
Why not just have 2 lenses?
With 2 different image sensors too?
Yeah.
Bomb.
Okay.
No good, no good reason.
Okay.
Other than it would just be more expensive.
Yeah.
But yeah, that part's like, I think a third of the company, like I said, digs holes, drives bucket trucks.
Yeah, sure.
keeps track of all the kind of inventory. But if you look at it, I didn't want to build that business.
Yes.
But early on in the company, there was this horrific case in Atlanta where a woman was just running in, our version of like Mission Dolores or pick your like nice park in the city, random act of violence. There's cameras everywhere in the park.
Yep.
None of them were working. And the city got blasted appropriately for it.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, but also like, do you really want our police department being in charge of like camera uptime?
Yeah.
That's a dumb idea.
Yeah.
We should like pay a company, i.e. Flock in this case, to just like make sure the stuff always works.
Yes.
So it's not my favorite part of the business in that sense of like, it's a lot of stress. It's very operationally intense, but I think it's valuable to our customers.
Yeah. How do you think about the right, you talk about cameras in the park, many movies center on this idea of universal surveillance, in the Bourne Identity or something, they have cameras on absolutely everything, or I guess the Bourne Supremacy, I think is more the Waterloo Station scene, and same with lots of other things. Just how do you create the right guardrails once you move off roads and into parks and public spaces and kind of creating access controls around that?
Yeah. The cop-out answer is like, I don't want to be in charge of deciding that. Mm-hmm. Thankfully, we have elected officials who we vote to make that decision.
But what do you think a sensible place for them to land is?
I think it's way higher than we have now. Like, I think that, for me at least, for every crime that occurs that doesn't get solved means we didn't have enough cameras. That's to me the easiest rubric. Mm-hmm. Now I think to your question though, it's a question of where they are, who has access to them, and I think it's one of the few cases where the disparity between maybe my knowledge and your knowledge of how the technology works and how an elected official works is like it's pretty big, and like their dreams of how it might work versus actually how it works, like it's much less sophisticated than they think or dream up. It's just a camera. So for me, at least, we should have an abundance of cameras and have an incredibly restrictive controls of how and when they're used. And the example I'd give you is like today, everything in Flock just you can generally do. There's data retention where we protect how long something is stored. So for live video, it's typically 7 days. For LPR data, it's typically 30 days. You can go longer or shorter if a democratically elected body votes on it. But like I would challenge, why not do more cameras and have a warrant restriction? Mm-hmm. Like, why not do 30 days of LPR data, but if you have a warrant, you have a year.
Yeah.
You need less cameras. And so I do think there are some nuanced ways to do it. And, thankfully, we have a really good government affairs team that is lobbying for that kind of legislation to say, like, there's a way for us to both be safe and maintain civil liberties. And it needs to be legislated, though.
Yes.
Like, I can't... those ideas are not in line with what my customers want. Mm-hmm. They want law enforcement customers. They just want to go catch bad guys. Yeah. They want to follow the Constitution, catch bad guys. But that nuance in the middle of like, but what is societally acceptable today really belongs in your elected officials to make that decision, so as it can change. And so we push them to be like, let's legislate this now before it becomes a problem.
Where do you think has passed sensible rules?
Sensible. I think Virginia's bill last year was pretty good. It did a few things well, and one thing I don't agree with. What it did well is it defined a modest data retention period of 21 days. I think that's fine. I like 30, but tomato, it's fine. It wasn't, I think the ACLU was lobbying for 3 minutes. It's a little tough. It's like hard to swallow. I think, 7, 14, 20 something days is like enough. There's a trade-off there. They mandated formal auditing, which I think is great. Not enough of our customers audit themselves on a regular basis. We can build software to make that easier, but we need to be pushed to do that. It's like customers don't want it. They need to be told to do it. So I think that was good. It also validated that this can only be used for criminal investigations, which I think is really good. While that's obvious, it's helpful to write it in law. I think the only thing that I disagree with is they did say, effectively, there's no participation with the federal government. And I think that's just, it's their choice.
Yeah.
I think it's their choice.
Yeah.
Like that, and that's the beauty of the country is like Virginia should do what feels right for Virginia.
Yeah.
But I worry about the types of cases that you you don't want to read about on the news that tend to get solved by the U.S. Marshals, the DEA, the ATF, the FBI, and like they can't use our technology in Virginia, which is, like I said, I live in Georgia, so thankfully it doesn't really impact me.
Yes.
But as a business, I'm like, I don't know if that's right. But I'm more than anything just happy they passed some legislation.
Yes.
New Mexico passed a similar bill this year. California has a similar-ish bill. I think a couple other states have. I think the worst type of bill is actually not, whether it's 14 days or 30 days of data retention. To me, the worst bill is an unenforceable bill. So you can imagine a bill that's like, this product cannot be used for possession of marijuana. I'm like, who's going to enforce it? How, and it's like,
It's not knowable.
You might believe that,
Yeah.
and that's great, but someone has to enforce this. And actually what's going to happen is no one's going to enforce it now. And that's, I think, like really bad law in those cases.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm curious what your view is on police department procurement. What do they do? What do they buy not enough of? What do they buy too much of? They don't feel like they're swimming in, procurement dollars. But yeah, I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, the thing they buy too much of is, and not to pick on Motorola, things that only matter in the 0.001% case. So it's like, guys, why don't you just use like cell phones? Like, well, in a natural disaster, and it's like, got it, okay. Like how often, so you look at like a landmass radio contract and it's gonna cost someone like San Francisco County, $200 million. Like, I mean,
You're
it's
talking
like
about that kind of money?
on a TCV basis. Oh yeah.
Wow.
I think Motorola's a really big company.
Sure. Yeah. That's how.
Yeah, it says you don't get there.
Yeah.
And you go, well, I get it. Like if there's an earthquake and every single cell tower goes down, law enforcement definitely needs a way to communicate. Man, is that really the only way?
Yeah.
Like, could you guys just like have your own tower? Like, there's got to be something. But you look into it.
Is this a your margin is my opportunity situation for you guys with radios?
Maybe because law enforcement's unique in this case, in which like they really also like that they own the infrastructure, like they own that bandwidth, and so they can do whatever they want with it.
Yeah.
I don't think they do anything interesting with it, but they can.
Yeah.
Versus if they're riding on Verizon or AT&T, they have no control over
No, but why don't you guys just have the exact same products, like
and have like a cheap
radio in the spectrum?
We probably should.
Yeah.
But we got
That's my,
things.
I'll like a VC in a board meeting.
Yeah, just like, hey,
like,
you
guys should do
an
this.
$80 billion company that's been in business for 130 years. Like, I mean, I guess you did it in payments, and it worked out pretty well. But yeah, so I think like that part I think is really, really kind of crazy. At least like in the business world, I feel like I buy for my majority case.
Yes.
And I deal with the ramifications of the edge case or build around it, and they do that. I think procurement is exceptionally slow and exceptionally laborious. Everything goes to RFP.
Yep.
But the RFP is written for one vendor. So all it does is wind up taking an extra year, 6 months. That's I get why RFPs exist.
Yeah.
But they're not actually RFPs. I've never seen an RFP that's not written for one vendor. I'm sure it exists somewhere.
Yeah.
I haven't seen
it
it.
yet.
I haven't seen it. But what I think they do well is like one of the things that I think the government did figure out is maybe you need to have an RFP for a $200 million contract. What about like a $10,000 contract? Great. So they do have spend levels where, if you're like a police chief, you can go spend $25,000 or $50,000 and like not have to go through the entire process. But it's tough. Like I would not wish upon anyone selling to local government. It's more negatives than positives in a lot of ways.
And again, that procurement process has evolved for a reason, and to protect against certain other failure modes. But yeah,
well, I mean, you think about it in business, and like, I know you. We use Stripe. I'm sure you have like 6 competitors. I don't know, but like, I know you. So I'm sure like buy Stripe. That in the business world is considered very normal.
Yeah.
In the government world, that is called illegal.
Yeah.
Which is really it's really interesting.
Yeah.
Like,
but again, it's evolved for a reason. The rules are written in blood.
Well, no, and then like you have plenty of cases where it's it's gone sideways.
Yeah.
But it is just an interesting dynamic. Like for so many things that we take for granted as normal business practice are definitively illegal when procuring with government.
How do you guys use Stripe?
I mean, a lot of our customers, a lot of our private sector customers pay either via credit card or check.
Okay.
We have a lot of checks.
Okay, so for the public sector, stuff that'll generally be via a torturous, RFP process and PO and something like that. But for your private sector,
when we don't want to be in the check deposit business, and you guys.
So you use Stripe for the check functionality, because no one knows about our check functionality, that Stripe can accept checks for you.
Am I allowed to talk about it?
Sorry, no one knows because we're bad at marketing.
I was just like,
not because it's a secret.
No, it's like we don't want to be in that business.
Yes.
It's like it's a remote deposit box or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah.
It's great.
We can give you an address that you can give to your customers, and they can mail checks to it, and we will turn it into digital money. And the fact that a bunch of atoms and an envelope going through the postal system were involved, you can forget about those details.
Not a single customer of ours pays via ACH, it's either check or credit card, and we do a lot of checks. I'd probably say 80%, 90% are checks, maybe higher.
You're one of the few tech companies to mostly use Stripe for checks.
It's trying to buck the trend every day of the week.
Yes,
so.
That's really funny. I love that. You were talking about police departments maybe being over-fixated on kind of the 0.1% cases. Does that apply to, a common critique that you hear of police department procurement is the sort of militarization of police departments, and what we really need is a Bearcat, for this town of 20,000 people, which is like an armored personnel carrier.
And it's
light.
like a $3 million vehicle, and it's like, why couldn't we just get an F-150?
Yeah. So do you think that applies also to kind of the shiny stuff?
Oh yeah, I mean, you look at like early on when we were building the company, we'd get the question of like, well, can your license plate reader work on a car going 175 miles an hour? And I was like, probably not. I've never driven that fast. I'd have to rent a runway to go test this.
Yes.
And they're like, it's really important. I'm like, well, really? Like, how often does it happen? They're like, in a high-speed pursuit, people drive very fast. And I'm like, in high-speed pursuit, who they are. Like, we were criticized and had to build a product. Like, until we got to 120, 150, it was a major blocker to sales.
Really? Huh.
I mean, it's like we built a camera we tested it on roads that we drove on. So we'd get up to 80 or 90 and it worked fine. But we had to we rented an amateur racing track.
Yes.
And just drove around in circles at 120 miles. We emailed the employee base and we were like, who owns a car that goes really fast? And that was actually kind of funny because a lot of people were
like, so what car did you use to test it?
There's some fast cars. Plenty of Teslas, Rivians, some other nicer cars.
Yep.
Drive really fast. And that was a fun day. It was with the cameras up and do it. But
and did the cameras work out of the box, or did you have to tune the model performance? Yeah, okay, so it worked. Yeah.
No, the only place where we had to make one modification, which is kind of interesting, we deploy a radar. So on really busy roads where our angle of incident is particularly tight, we can't shoot super far down, we have to shoot at a sharp angle.
Yep.
We have a radar attachment that we tilt backwards to notify the cars on the way, get ready, which helps. But that's a very far edge case. Because the camera doesn't actually...
You prime the camera, essentially?
Yes, to get ready for a car coming.
Huh. And sorry...
Because the camera is offline unless there's a vehicle.
I see, so you boot it up. And that's a power-saving measure?
Yeah.
Okay.
The most expensive thing we do is take a picture.
Yeah.
The second most expensive thing we do is send stuff to the cloud. Third is just being a computer turned on.
Yep.
And so it's similar to your iPhone, turning your screen off.
Okay.
So we added the button, to take a photo right away.
The continuously running radar is very low power?
It's negligible.
I see.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, that was a fun one.
We were talking about hardware previously, but what's building your own drones been like?
A lot of fun.
Sounds fun.
No, it's fun, but it's I've kids, and I know you have a kid. It's really fun to build a product that your kids understand. It's we drive around Atlanta, and my son will count the cameras from home to school, or we'll go to the airport, or we'll go to the park, and I love that he can actually understand what dad does.
Yes.
I'm not sure if you've taught your son how to
I'm
use
screwed
a
on this
console.
access.
We process the world's payments. And so when you show him a drone, he's like, "Oh, this is so cool." And he has a little miniature drone.
Well, also, you don't only do drones, but you do drones to catch bad guys.
Yeah. It's very compelling.
From a very early age.
To be clear, he'll watch Paw Patrol and be like, "That's what Dad builds. That's the helicopter." I'm like, well, we don't put any people in it. But I think what's been fun is we made a hypothesis that, if you've studied planes, I think the most interesting plane, military-wise, is the Warhawk. Was whereas traditionally you built a plane, you're like,
one
all right,
thing.
Yeah, like what kind of missiles can we add? And they were like, no, let's design the best missile. It's like very precise, very big, and then we'll figure out how to fly it.
Yep.
And so our thesis was, well, we're really good at cameras. A drone is really just a camera that flies. Let's build the best payload and then figure out how to fly it. And so like if I showed you, I could show you the payload the next time you're in Atlanta, or we could fly one out here. It's like the coolest camera ever. It's huge. It's like this big. And it's got 4 different, I think it's 4 different image sensors, maybe 6, different optical lenses. Like we can zoom, we can read a license plate almost a mile away, like crazy specs, great thermal. Then we're going to get to fly. So like, I don't know, I was an electrical engineer. One of my co-founders was a mechanical engineer. It's fun to build things that fly. So it's like, all right, we have a payload, we have this airframes, we have aeronautical engineers now. Like it's been fun to grow the engineering team.
Yes.
An imaging team, you think about the dock that it lives in, it's effectively a commercial grade HVAC system. Like the drone lands, it needs to be cold, it needs to be hot, it has to charge. If you know anything about lithium ion doesn't like to be too hot or too cold, so you got to keep that well conditioned. It's like this huge compressor, it's this massive thing that opens and closes, and if it's snowing, if it's frozen, like all of these engineering problems.
Yes.
And that's like, that's the fun part of this stuff.
Yes,
like,
yes.
Everything else is, selling is good, but like building stuff's fun.
How many drones do you have out there in the world?
But we don't disclose that one,
But decent number.
it's hundreds of cities that are flying.
Are flying drones.
Yeah.
Flying drones. Let's go.
Yeah.
It's funny when you talk about the A10 Warthog. You're reminding me of the Boyd book, which by Robert Coram, which I only read recently, but it's like one of this kind of Silicon Valley canon.
Yeah.
And everyone talks about it. And everyone talks about him in the context of his OODA loop. Orient something, decide, act.
Yeah.
But I think that's actually kind of overrated. And actually, the main reason Boyd is interesting is helping the Pentagon procure better planes. I'm just reminded of that with the Warthog and also, your description of needing to run at 170 miles an hour. Because basically he came into a Pentagon that had a bunch of bad planes because all the generals were just obsessed with specs.
Yes.
And they wanted, a high top speed and like they really judged planes on specs. And actually, the fighter pilot joke is that there are only 2 throttle settings in a dogfight. Maximum full military power or throttles idle. Like those are the only
That's
two,
the only two that actually matter.
energy states that you're in. And what matters is maneuverability and the ability to add energy or lose energy quickly. So anyway, he was involved in basically all of the good planes that were produced, including the A10 Warthog, because he got them out of the mindset of just kind of speeds and feeds. Yeah.
Well, and that's like for us, the spec we track is like time on scene.
Yeah.
And so one of the reasons why we care so much the payload is like, if you have a payload that can see really far away, you don't have to fly there. So actually you get there faster virtually, which is what, like, if this was a drone that was carrying a payload like a zip line or something else, like actually physically in there matters. But for us, it's just about time on virtual scene.
Yes.
So that's what we measure ourselves to. So that's why we fly high, because like physics allows you to see farther.
Yep.
That's why we have this huge payload, so you don't have to actually fly there. And then you don't have to fly as fast, which means you can conserve battery life, which means you're in the air longer. Like all of these designs were around that use case versus like, I'm sure Zipline went through a whole separate use case of like, what's the max payload and all that kind of stuff. So
how many drones does a city the size of San Francisco need?
12.
Okay, so
it's not a lot.
Very small number.
No, because I mean, our average drone can cover a 30 square mile radius and get there within under a minute. And thankfully, knock on wood, like there actually aren't that many 911 calls that merit a response. So we look at it both ways. We look at it in terms of geography and then 911 density. So in more rural parts, you need less drones because there's less call for service. And then in more dense urban areas, you need more drones, mostly from a volume of service. But even in our most dense customers, like it's pretty rare that they fly 2 drones at once. It happens, but it's like, I think our busiest drone is being flown, 90 hours a week. That's a lot of flight time.
And sorry, do you dispatch the drone when it's needed from its charging dock, or is the idea that it's out there flying already and you just task it?
Yeah, it lives in the dock.
Okay.
There's debate of whether a drone should be in the air at all times.
Does that actually save you meaningful time?
Being in the air, I would save a lot of time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but like you look at the Carpenter case in Baltimore, and they had an airplane with a very powerful camera, 24 hours a day, and that was deemed like a unwarranted search, and so it got killed. And so we're very conscious. Like we have other part of our business that is kind of interesting now at scale is like we have a full team of constitutional attorneys, and I'm sure you have like a regulatory team that when you want to build something, they're like, let's check it before we ship.
Yes.
We have a constitutional team. It's like, cool idea. Let's actually make sure this doesn't violate the
Let's
Constitution.
just look up the Fourth Amendment here real quick.
Yeah, let's just like double check this thing. And so when you look at the drone, like we believe, and this hasn't been tested in court, but these are smart people. They're like, look, it's unclear how that would end in court.
Yeah.
But if you call 911, there is a reason to fly the drone. If there's a gunshot, if there is like with gunshot detection, if there's a stolen car, like that is a reason to dispatch versus just like flying around looking for stuff. It's not unconstitutional, but we would not push that as a use case.
But sorry, like a lot of this precedent, as new technologies come along, people reason by analogy of like, a car is somewhat like your house, but somewhat different, whatever. Like, isn't a drone flying around just like a police cruiser on its patrol?
So and I'm not an attorney.
Yeah.
Hasn't been
Neither am I.
tested.
Never stopped
so
me yet.
The other analogy that would be the butterfly effect, which is like when things are much, much cheaper and much, much easier, historical precedent gets thrown away. And so you take the helicopter example. You could say, oh, well, helicopters fly sometimes. But yeah, but helicopters are so expensive. It's not practical to have 24/7 aerial coverage. With a drone, it's not impractical. Yeah. It's the same reason why like when we launch our drone, we want to go from like the launch location to the end location, the camera's pointed at the horizon the whole time. We don't want to look in your backyard. That's like, we feel really strong. And that's not a law. That's just like our point of view of where the law should be.
Yes.
So we'll build a product for that.
Got it.
And then if the operator wants to tilt down, that's their control. But as a default, we're flying straight
That's
out.
very interesting. Last question, so you guys have grown with cameras out there in cities, now getting into drones, building the software OS to help law enforcement agencies and others kind of synthesize all the information they have. Just what comes next? What future product ideas are you playing with? Where do you want to go?
So if you think about it, we talked about this earlier. Failure for Flock is prison population goes up. It's actually like really bad. And we look at, the products today are very much focused in the middle of a crime. A crime has already happened, and therefore we should solve it. And that's really good. And I think we're definitely not done, but we've done a lot of work in that category. I get pretty interested in expanding that and going, well, what can we be doing from a product perspective to prevent crime from happening? And that actually doesn't necessarily look like software. It's like one of the interesting things that we started last year is what we call our Thriving Cities Fund. It's probably an analogy similar to your like Stripe Press, which is like, it's never going to be the core of your business, but like you feel really good that it's a part of your business. And so when we go in places like Greenville, Mississippi, we also commit to deploy capital as growth partners to those businesses. Because if we want to convince that 16-year-old to not be a criminal, there does need to be jobs, jobs that like a 16-year-old can get. And so we deploy capital in, restaurants, nail salons, like pick your business that you can be 16 and work at easily. And like, we want more of those to exist. Last year, I think we were at, 21% IRR. So like, it's not a bad business. It's not, I think Flock stock's done a lot better than 21%, but like I feel really strongly we could deploy hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars of capital in the cities that also choose to be safe. I don't want to go deploy capital in a place that doesn't want to be safe. But for that. So I'm like, I want to do more there. And then I think to our conversation on the other half, the majority of the crime we solve is not violent. It's nonviolent. And today, the discrepancy for a juvenile, non-juvenile, you still wind up in some type of penitentiary or prison system. I think that's crazy. Like all the data shows, as soon as you wind up in prison, you're going to get violent and you're going to come back. And so I would articulate there as an opportunity, don't know yet what it is, to say, oh, well, hold on. If this was an opportunistic criminal, is there a product with a capital P, because it might not be software, it might be hardware, software, I don't know, that allows that person to have a second chance? And in a way that is not going to increase their likelihood of doing it again. Like that's bad, but like prison can't be the answer. Like it just doesn't work. And the whole concept of prison will never work. Like, and there are some incredibly well-run prisons with really well-intentioned wardens doing the best of their ability, but the concept of putting a bunch of violent people together is like by default flawed. And so I question like, what could Flock be doing to say, I'm going to prevent kids from becoming criminals. And if you do wind up on that path, how do I get you back on track as fast as possible? And we're a for-profit business, so I'm not looking to be a nonprofit. But I think there is something there. I mean, you're talking about millions and millions of people who really need, like, it's actually, as a society, in our best interest to get them back in and productive. And I want to do both of those.
So fewer crimes, fewer people in prisons.
Yeah. That's the end goal.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. It was fun.
It was awesome.
Yeah.